Okay, it looks like it's going live now. Yes, it is.
How would I test that, John? Let me test through the link on the agenda packet.
City of River Falls. See the mayor.
Okay, so I can confirm that I am using the link on the public agenda that's out on the city's website to YouTube, and that the live broadcast is working. I also can confirm that we did not have anyone call City Hall prior to 4 p.m. today to be accommodated for public comment remotely. So I guess we can check with city attorney. I believe that we're in compliance with the open meetings, and that obviously people can be at City Hall, have access to the meeting, and they also have access to watch it on YouTube. I'm not sure that they can access it through the WebEx portal without knowing the 1, 2, 3, 4 password. But I don't believe that that would invalidate or frankly limit the public's ability, especially given the fact that the WebEx is what we use for remote public comment, but you can have full access to the meeting on the YouTube site. So Attorney Gerhardt, do you have any, before we start the meeting, do you think that we're in shape to do so?
Administrator Simpson, I do not. I think we are good to proceed under the open meetings law. There's sufficient means to attend the meeting and comment if necessary.
Okay, sorry for the delay, Mayor.
No, you're fine.
I believe we're ready to go.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 11th River Falls City Council meeting. First thing we'll do is say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America,
to the
to the republic
stands
for which stands
one
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On to roll call. Christie.
Bierstead.
Here.
Onier.
Here.
Morset.
Here.
O'Dean.
here,
Plunkett.
Here.
Watson.
Here. Okay, Christie?
Yes.
Okay. Next, move on to approval of the minutes from the July 28th regular and closed session meeting minutes.
I move approval.
Second. Questions or comments from anyone? Okay. Christie, we have a first and a second for approval of the minutes from the July 28th meeting.
Alderperson.
Yeah, we're losing you, Christie.
Alderperson Plunkett.
There you go.
O'Dean.
aye,
Watson.
Aye.
Gagne. Morset. Downing.
Aye.
Bierstead.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and next we have the approval of the bills with Mr. Downing.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I move for the approval of the bills from 7/25/2020 to 8/7/2020 in the amount of $1,713,782.59, subject to the comptroller.
Second.
Okay, we have first and a second. Any questions or comments? Okay, Christie, approval of the bills?
Have a second on that. I didn't get that.
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry, who was the second on the approval of the bills?
Who was the second on the bills?
I was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Bierstead was.
Thank you. Ms. O'Dean,
Aye.
Downing,
Aye.
Morset.
Aye.
And
Aye.
Watson,
Aye.
Bierstead,
Aye.
Plunkett,
Aye.
you.
Okay. Next, move on to public comments. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to stand up and talk, now would be the time. Yeah, Jason, is there anybody there?
We have some guests, but none of them are interested in public comment.
Okay, thank you. So then we will move on to the
Oh,
consent.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, yeah,
if I
Oh,
could,
yes,
I've got
please,
a
go
public
ahead.
comment.
yes, I forgot.
I saw, I was contacted by somebody from the National Guard Armory here in town. And I got an email back from a Sergeant Jameis Ketting. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. As many of you know, Delta Company of the 1st Battalion, 128th Infantry, which is headquartered out of Eau Claire, is stationed here in River Falls. They also have companies in Menominee, New Richmond, and Arcadia. The battalion totals about 390 soldiers. 200 of those have already returned to the battalion, but in River Falls, we have Delta Company, which is comprised of about 89 soldiers. They currently are on their way back from Afghanistan after 10 months. 45 soldiers got back in early May. Another 10 came back in the middle of June. And we're waiting on the last 34 soldiers who are scheduled to return Thursday, the 13th, which would be Thursday, I believe, Thursday afternoon. They left on July 17th of 2019 and conducted training at Fort Hood. And then they completed 10 months over in Afghanistan. So I just wanted to recognize, I thought it would be good for the public to know, if you see these soldiers and their families who serve to keep us safe, please thank them for us and please go out of your way to thank them. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Morissette. I couldn't agree anymore. And thank goodness they're all coming home safe. Okay. So let's move on to the consent agenda. First thing is a resolution approving the renewal of the city's of the city's insurance policy with travelers, and this would be through August of 2021. Next one is a resolution adopting the disaster damage aid petition. This is for disaster damage from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation for repairs on Powell Avenue. The next one is a resolution approving the chief of police proclamations. This resolution approves an exemption from chapter 17.68.100 B3.b, requiring a special use permit for tables in the public right of way within the downtown overlay district. Does anybody want to pull anything?
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Gagne would like to pull number 3.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull consent agenda item number 2.
okay, anybody else?
Make a motion, we approve the consent agenda. I guess all it is item number 4.
Item number,
Oh, item number 2. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Second.
okay, got a first and a second. Is there any discussion on item number 2?
Mr.
Mr.
Mayor,
Mayor, I pulled number 2.
number 2 was pulled. Number 4
Oh.
is available.
I did
for
have it right.
motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wrote it, that was my fault. I wrote it down wrong. Mr. Gagne pulled number 2, right?
No, I did.
Oh, okay. I had it all backwards. Sorry. Hang on one second. Jeepers. Okay. Item number 4. We got a first and a second on item number 4. Questions or comments from anybody?
Actually, Mr. Mayor,
Yep,
I made a mistake.
Mr. Gagne.
So, Sean, you pulled which one?
Number 2.
Number 2.
I need to pull number 4.
Okay.
Sorry, my mistake.
Hang on a second now.
My motion and start over.
Yes.
Please,
Draw my motion. Diane, do you withdraw your second?
I do.
Okay, let's try this again. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve consent agenda item number 2.
3.
Number 2. Number 3. Number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3.
Number
Okay,
3.
we're approving number 3.
Second.
Ow. So, so I got a first and a second on number 3. Questions or comments from anyone? Okay, Christie, I have a first and a second on the resolution adopting the disaster damage aid petition.
Alderperson Plunkett, or sorry, Gagne.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't hear that.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Plunkett. Husted.
Aye.
Morset.
Aye.
Downing.
Aye.
Odie.
Aye.
Watson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. And now, Mr. Downey, you pulled number 2.
Resolution approving renewal of city's insurance policy with travelers. Mr. Mayor, it reads in the packet, during this year's negotiations, we tried to secure another extension, but travelers will not offer a rate guarantee for upcoming policy terms due to volatility in the current marketplace. No insurance carriers are offering rate guarantees at this time. As you know, some insurance companies have loyalty rewards for staying with them. I read in the packet that they are unwilling to lock in rates. So my question is, don't they still have some form of discount for previous customers who choose to stay with them? I know these loyalty rewards are not locked in. However, I was curious if we got a discount at all for being a repeat customer who acts in good faith, and if there was any bids that were even close. So those are my 2 questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Simpson.
Yeah, and to clarify, and that's part of the reason for it being in the packet for the council to approve. This was not a bid item. We periodically review items like insurance, banking, and others and do secure bids. This was not put out to bid again. We have done bids in the past for this. And so instead we worked with them to secure a renewal, and staff is recommending that we do renew with travelers. We believe that this is in our best interest at this point. However, council certainly has the authority to suggest to us that we go out for a formal bid process if you think that there's reason to do so. But this is not procured through a formal bid. At this time, I believe the last time we did the formal bid was in 16 or 17.
Mr. Simpson, is there any, does it show in the process, even though we just had this one, that there was any consideration for being with them as a customer?
I think travelers would suggest that this is the price based on their knowledge of us as a customer. And we do get on workers' comp in particular, we do get a dividend, so to speak, for our good claim history. It's not necessarily akin to what you may receive on your personal or homeowner's insurance, where if you don't have a claim, you get something back. This is more about the actual experience mod factor that the city lands on for workers' comp, which is pretty favorable. But no, I don't believe we could tell you that there's a specific discount built in based on our renewing this. This is essentially their best foot forward, and then staff is suggesting that in our interest to take these rates, understanding that we haven't done a formal bid process to secure it up, but we certainly did. We're requesting on most of our bids or most of our quotes these days to get at least a 2-year. We've done that in the past with health insurance and others and tried to get it, but I can tell you the market, as we've experienced lately, people are not eager to do that.
Thanks, Scott. Mr. Mayor, I don't know how I feel about this particular item. I think I'd be more comfortable if we had a competitive bid process, so I'll be voting no.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a comment? Just to give a little bit of background, I think Mr. Simpson indicated we get competitive bids periodically for banking and insurance and a host of other different things. We don't do those annually. Sean, to be honest with you, I've gone through that emotion previously about should we get RFPs every year. That doesn't create a good relationship in the marketplace with your vendors. And it's a monumental task for the staff to undertake. Not that should be a reason, but I think we want staff to focus on certain things. I can tell you in my day job, I have a lot of clients that are commercial clients. They're seeing rates very similar to this. There's a very long-term uncertainty right now in the marketplace, and that is in banking as well as in insurance. So I understand your point of view, certainly respect your position on it, but I just thought maybe that'd be a little bit of background that might help you. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification. Mary, you're muted, but a point of clarification is that we are assisted by an agent. So this isn't staff just kind of calling people and seeing if they think this is a good deal. We're working with a brokerage, but understand the sentiment from Councilmember Downing and certainly that's part of the reason we want to make sure the council's aware of what we're doing and all transparency. This is not a bid process for 2021. That being said, we believe this is a favorable contract for us going into 2021.
So I'll take a motion on this,
I'd
on
like-
item number 2.
Sorry, I'd like to say something real quick.
Oh, yeah.
I don't, from my perspective, what I'm saying is not sentiment. There was not a competitive bidding process. And although there is some industry practice in going forward, I would feel much more comfortable if there was a competitive bidding process, simply because it would probably give us the best results and actually see what the reality is better. I'm not comfortable with the reality of not having a bidding process at this moment.
Mr. Mayor,
Okay.
may I?
Yep.
If I can direct a question to Mr. Simpson, having been on the council for some time, I know that periodically we do go through a bidding process for insurance. It's just not every year. Am I correct in remembering that?
Yeah, that's correct. And some items we may procure, like garbage contract as an example, we may go through a formal bidding process. Then we select through this formal bidding process a vendor. We then negotiate a contract, which is often more than 1 year. So say 3 or 5 years. There's often contract language that allows for renewals, that the council, when they approve the initial contract, says, we can renew this twice for 3 years or something like that. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes the bidding process is just for a single contract term, and then it's anticipated that we are going to bid it out each time. And when I say bid it out, I mean a formal bid process. We're often in the situation where we're getting quotes, and that's laid out in the purchasing policy for the council's approved, essentially. But this was not a competitive bidding process. This was
right.
staff reviewing this. We felt that the bidding was within a reasonable period of time, but that's certainly subjective. because there isn't any hard and fast line. We don't, the purchasing policy doesn't say that with no more than 10 years apart or no more than 5 years apart, we'll do formal bidding for X, Y, and Z services. So, and some cities do have that policy. They'll say that, you know, we'll bid banking every 5 years, or we'll bid our seal coating every certain year. But we are certainly relying on the professional experience of the broker, who's saying 5% for 2021 is favorable. You should quickly renew this at that rate. But there's no certainty that that's 100% true, because you only find out for sure if you go out for formal bids.
At some point, did we decide to purchase insurance from Travelers? Was that part of a formal bidding process? I seem to remember switching insurers at some point.
Yeah, I believe we switched from, I can't remember if it was called the Wausau Company. Some of the insurance companies have changed their around.
Is it Lincoln National? No.
No, I think it was a successor to the Wausau, or the larger firm that bought Wausau is who we were with for
Liberty Mutual.
Liberty. That's what it was. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mayor. Liberty Mutual.
And that's who we dealt with for most of the first part of my career. But I can't tell you without looking at I don't know if we included that detail in the memo. But that's what I recall too, is that we probably, I think it was 2016 that we went out for bids for 2017 and 18 coverage. And at the time we asked people to give us a 2-year kind of renewal.
Yep. In the agenda, it says the city will go out every 5 years for an insurance bid, and the last one was in 2017. That's when we switched over to Travelers Insurance. Yep.
And if I may, one more question for Mr. Simpson. From what you indicated, there are certainly staff advantages to sticking with Travelers at this point.
Yes, that's our belief. Is if you look at the history on the coverage from 10, 11, 12, and you kind of work through there, you can see that in 2017, 18, that renewal was, you know, about 65,000 less than the previous year. So to Council Member Downing's point, you know, when you do the formal bid process, you tend to get sometimes you get companies that almost buy your business. They're looking to get a relationship with you and prove that they can do business. So there's art and science to trying to determine when and if we go out to bid. There is not a policy right now that says, you know, staff must bid every 5 years for insurance, and that's certainly within your purview, but it's also, that's why this is a good time to talk about things too at the council meeting. When you have the bid due, you can certainly let us know as a council what your wishes are for frequency of bidding and that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to approval of consent agenda item number 2.
Second.
Okay, we've got a first and a second. Are there any other questions or comments from anybody?
Mr. Mayor, I have one comment. I do think we should have a process where we go over what industry standards are currently, and especially in uncertain times. We might find that we'd be better positioned depending on review in this sense. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Plunkett.
Oh, Mr. Plunkett.
Yeah, these last competitive bidding processes, what sort of range were we seeing in the bids that we received?
I think
Do we have those numbers available?
we would have those numbers available. I don't have them available, but I suspect we saw the premium range probably 50,000 plus or minus from where we're at. especially keeping in mind that the year right before we renewed, our premium was about 365,000. And then the next year we were at 300. So in order to get the bid, they were 65,000 less than the previous year. And you can't, I mean, I wouldn't credit all of that to the bidding process, because again, they're looking at our loss ratio and, you know, when's the last time you had a vehicle fire, or when's the last time that you had, you know, some kind of property damage or other things that they're looking at. And then I'm trying to think of the last time we had a significant jump on one of the lines. They're pretty incremental, most of them. So I would say, Councilmember Plunkett, we can get that information, but I would say, I think it's reasonable to expect that this bid that we accepted was at least 50,000 lower than all the, than the highest bid would have, you know, been. And probably there was a wider gap.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simpson. May I follow up on that, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
I gather that this would not be the appropriate time to talk about a policy in place, and I don't know of any procedure that we have in place right now to allow alderpersons to bring an item to the agenda. Am I correct in my understanding?
Correct. Certainly if it's related to the item that we're discussing, I think it could be mentioned that you'd be interested in something related to a policy on insurance. I don't think that's too far afield for this discussion, but if you, for example, wanted to talk about, you know, a policy on the depth of wood chips at the park, that probably this would not be the appropriate time on the agenda to do so. So if you have, if council members had, so if Mr. Downing wanted, I believe this to be the case, that if Mr. Downing wanted us to, in future, develop policy related to the duration between bids on items of a certain amount of money, that wouldn't be an unreasonable thing to talk about with this discussion. But it doesn't direct staff to do it. It's telling us what at least one council member is interested in pursuing.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Gagne?
you know, I appreciate the protections and the accountability piece from Sean, just to make sure that we're, you know, being accountable to the taxpayers and as representatives. The only concern I would have with having a policy in place is if we were, say, every 5 years or every 3 years even, to go tell the people that are bidding on our insurance that, hey, we're going to drop you in 3 years unless you undercut the rest. I don't think anybody's going to bid on us. And if they did, what would be in their best interest to even give us a good offer, because they know in 3 to 5 years they're down the road. I think it's in our best interest to have that spade in the deck of going, hey, we're going to shop this whole year looking for new insurance, and next year we're going to bid, right? Not saying we're doing it in this instance, but that gives us the spade in the deck to go, okay, what's in our best interest versus what's in the best interest of the people that want to bid us in next year or the next 5 years, because then they can come hunt us versus us hunting them. That's kind of my thought on it.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything on this?
I have a perspective I'd like to share.
Yep, Mr. Downing.
I've always been successful in saving money when I shop around and bid out anything for myself. But I know that in certain times it's good to look harder at what we're blocking into. But I also am in favor of a process where we do competitively bid, because we'd save money. So, thank you.
So to kind of clarify this, I think what we have been doing, if I remember since I've been mayor, like usually every 4, 5, 6 years, we'll go out and get a competitive bid for insurance. We're talking insurance now. So, Mr. Downing, would you be interested in if we were to come up with some kind of a ordinance where every 5 years we would definitely get a bid on insurance? Are you looking more than that or something along those lines?
I would like to know what the standards practices are for cities and find a way we can improve the way we've been doing it.
Okay.
So we have more measures of accountability in place to secure a competitive bid that would save us money on more of a consistent basis.
And Scott, I'm sure we could have somebody on staff look into that. How other cities, if they're doing it every 3 years or every 5 years, or how they do it.
Yeah, I think that data would be available, although I'd be hesitant to call that best practice or standard. I think, there's some cities that have pretty sophisticated purchasing apparatus, and they believe that the money they spend on that is coming back to them and savings through their procurement. But I would, again, we're cautious about spending 10 cents to save a nickel. So that's, there, by no means is there as much science on that as I'd like there to be. Mr. Mayor, I think Mr. Plunkett I don't know if he's on your split screen or not. But
No, he's not.
Mr. Plunkett had his hand raised.
Oh, there he is. Sorry, Mr. Plunkett. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I definitely understand the concerns about wanting to have competitive bidding. However, as I look at the potential liability environment that the city is going to be entering currently and into the next year, I am very, very concerned about what I see as some very large potential liabilities in the millions, if not many more dollars. Despite the very careful actions that the city has taken, it is possible, and I might even say likely, that the city is going to bear liability at some point here for potential COVID spread to its workers and from those to the larger community. And I, at this point, would be much more comfortable having a large policy in place and signed that covers that huge liability upon the taxpayers that I see potential facing us entity at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, does anybody else have anything else on this?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Simpson.
Yep.
Entering into a competitive bid process would not take away what we currently have for our insurance, would it?
No, I mean, it's just a matter of the investment and the time and resources, and if we believe we'd end up in a better environment. So you're weighing the cost and benefit of the process, and certainly with government, we are aware that it's not always just the result that matters, meaning the lowest cost is not always the thing we're looking for. Sometimes it's the accountability piece is just as important, meaning that, people perceive that the money is being carefully vetted out. So, I mean, there's bidding processes that actually end up costing cities more. There's not always, the competitive bidding process doesn't always result in lower overall costs. But sometimes you're willing to take those extra costs on because people know, there was a fair shake, so to speak, at the business of the public.
Thank you.
Mr. Plunkett?
Mayor, my concern is that until the city signs upon the line that is dotted, we have no guarantee of having coverage at this price, or indeed a price that is anywhere close to what we're seeing. What I am hearing from some insurance industry contacts is that there is potential for nationwide trillions of dollars in liability. And the only way that that is going to be funded is through huge increases in rates. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
I have a
go ahead.
comment. I apologize. I think we're thoroughly discussing this topic. That's for sure. One thing I would like to point out is that we do get a rather competitive bid in the fact that we have a broker here that we pay this year $25,000 to. It's in the broker's best interest to bring us the most competitive bid out there. If he doesn't do that, we'll find somebody else and we'll go to another broker. That competitive bid piece sort of happens at the broker, and it calls on the broker's knowledge of the industry to make sure that, number one, the city of River Falls is a good fit for that carrier, which happens quite a bit. Some cities and some exposures are different for different sized municipalities, and they look out for the best coverage types as well as the price. We've got a 5-year policy in place right now. That policy is rather loose, but let's just take for instance, if we get a 2-year renewal and another 2-year renewal, well, all of a sudden, if we got a 5-year policy, we can't go another 2 years with somebody because in that middle year, that first year, according to our policy, we're going to have to rebid it. So I think the process we have in place is adequate. I think it takes care of our needs. I think we've got the best interest of the city looked out for by the fact that we've hired a broker here. And so I guess those are my comments.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Christie, I have a first and a second on the resolution approving the renewal of the city's insurance policy with travelers.
Alderperson Morissette,
Aye.
Watson,
Aye.
Plunkett, Gagne,
Aye.
Odine,
Aye.
Bierstead,
Aye.
Downing.
No.
Okay, next is a resolution ratifying, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Gagne, you pulled this. Number 4.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Council, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for our downtown businesses to get folks outside. I was recently, a couple weeks ago, downtown Stillwater, and they've literally shut down streets with barricades and put out tables and chairs so people can easily social distance, get outside so they're not stuck in an indoor environment. And it really opens an opportunity for our businesses to stay open, do business, for our people to go down and spend their money and enjoy themselves during this rough time. The one thing that I'm not going to make an amendment on, but I'd like police chief to take a closer look at in his proclamation is the no alcohol served at tables. I think if a business could do that right outside their front doors at maybe a table with 2 or 3 people, I wouldn't have any concern with that. But generally speaking, I'm highly in favor of allowing our businesses to take their business outside. And I would love to see this going long term, not even just during COVID. I think this would be a great opportunity for our businesses to take their business out to the front doors, out to the front steps, and it looks great. People roll through communities and they see this stuff. It really makes people want to stop and have dinner out on the front porch of these businesses. So I'm in favor of this, and I move for the approval of consent agenda number 4, resolution ratifying chief of police proclamation.
Second.
Okay, first and second. Any questions or comments from the council on this? Okay, Christie, I have a first and a second on the resolution ratifying the chief of police proclamation.
Alderperson Watson.
Aye.
Plunkett. Bierstead,
Aye.
Morissette,
Aye.
Gagne,
Aye.
Downing,
Aye.
Odine.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the first reading of ordinance number 2020-07, amending the comprehensive plan and future land use map. This is an ordinance to amend the comprehensive plan and future land use map for Man Valley and DeSantis Park vicinity. The second reading will be at the August 25th meeting. Does the council have any questions about this?
Mr. Mayor?
Yep, Mr. Downing?
I do have some questions and comments and concerns regarding this particular item. As you can see on my coffee mug, it says, great idea, start with coffee. Unfortunately for this one, it started with a virus, and it skipped the Plan Commission. And as people know, there was a severe lack of community engagement regarding the DeSantis Park property. And because of that, it went to the council first, which is not practical procedure. Today, we have a petition that has over 1,000 signatures from our community, maybe not all of them from our community, but I would say a majority of them probably from our community. And they're saying they're not in favor of the current project we're looking at. And I can't help but wonder how we could have improved our community outreach. I don't think we met our goal in that sense, especially when it skipped the Plan Commission. And from my understanding, in their last meeting, it tied it as a vote to go ahead with the current project regarding DeSantis Mills. But I just got an email today from a commissioner who was not able to get to the meeting, who would have actually made it so they weren't in favor of it since it was tied. So I myself am not comfortable with the DeSantis Mills plan going forward. However, regarding this, it talks about high density. I am in favor of a plan that would keep it more of a nature park, more quiet, more serene, the way people like it. That would also have amenities such as a small dog park, a nature trail that connects property we own in the back so people can hike, and renewable energy for the school. So with that said, the Girard Corporation plan had 44 townhomes that would actually be a compromise for the people who want a more quiet nature park, which is what the original discussion and conditions for that park were. And I'd be more in favor of having that. With that said, Mr. Mayor, I do believe that members of the Plan Commission did a good job getting 360. I just don't think it's the correct fit for that park. I think that would be better fit west of that area.
Excuse me, Mr. Downing, I have to raise a point of order here. I think we're talking about the Man Valley plan, not the DeSantis Park plan.
They're both in there, Scott.
It's in the vicinity of the, DeSantis Park is we are using part of that park. But I understand your passion about the project itself, but this is about so are you saying you're against the comprehensive plan and future land use map?
If it makes it difficult for us to get a decent project in there, then yes, I am. My concern is the community might not welcome the current project that we're looking at. And I believe we can do both. There's the Girard Corporation plan. I believe we can find a developer who will do it. But I also believe to the west, and maybe Mr. Simpson can help me elaborate more, that there would be room for development if we worked with the school. Mr. Simpson, would that be a possibility that we could look into to make a better, approach for our community so everybody would welcome what we'd call smart and healthy development that followed the original conditions of what we call a peaceful, quiet nature park?
There's a few questions in there. I have to try to sort that out. The item in front of you is amendment of the future land use map, which does include the strip of land being proposed for the project by 360 Development. The future land use map does include a change to the future land use designation, not the zoning, not the underlying zoning of the property, but the designation. And the action that you would be taking by approving this is indicating that the long-term plan for that property is a higher level of density than what was shown in the original comprehensive plan and future land use map. So staff has prepared that based on what we think is a reflection of what direction we've got from the Plan Commission and the council over the last number of years related to increasing infill density. In particular, that was a strategic initiative that the council had suggested staff undertake. So I think that trying to answer that question, to the question of does this make it easier to do other projects? I think the answer is yes. But any projects that are more than low density residential will require a planned unit development process, which we're going through, and what you indicated was modified. You indicated correctly was modified for under our COVID plan. The council acted as the plan commission in a step of the process, and then it was kind of handed back to the plan commission for another step. Regards to the question about could this be developed by Gerard or other developers under the development plan that Gerard put forward? Sure. The answer is yes, that's a possibility. They did not propose to do so in our kind of RFP process. And to answer the question about could this be done north or west of this property, I think from a planning perspective, our planners would suggest that, yeah, this project could also fit in other areas of the community, but it's proposed for this area of the community and this particular piece of property. So that's what will be in front of you at the next meeting is the specific implementation plan. The GDP was, I'm being reminded that the GDP was approved for Gerard, just like you've approved the GDP, which is the general development plan or the overall kind of concept plan for the property. So somebody else could say, we like that plan and we'd like to kind of take it through the process and try to get the SIP and other things approved by the council. So, but we'll cover that to a greater extent in the memorandums. We have covered it in the plan commission, the information the plan commission received, but also when it comes to the council next meeting, certainly we'll go through the background of kind of how we got to the point we are, and all the different points of public contact and others involved. And certainly that's up for the council to judge whether the process meets their expectations or not, and whether you feel it should be modified or stopped or changed or otherwise implemented. So this item is which was approved or recommended by the plan commission is to indicate to the community maybe more clearly than it has been that this is a spot that the council believes is good for a higher density than single family housing, and that's the plan for the future land use. And future is defined as whenever, sometime after today. So.
Thank you, Scott. Mr. Mayor, I have some mixed feelings about the entirety of the process. As I had mentioned earlier, jumped to us and lost an aspect of community engagement and review from the plan commission. And now they're no longer in favor, from my understanding of the current numbers of the plan commissioners.
Mr. Mayor?
I am not personally in favor of going forward, even though I'm in favor of high density, because from my understanding, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the expectation of the money and also the expectation of that 7-acre plot it was always slated for development. The question is what's the appropriate development for it? So I'm not in favor of the current development. However, I would understand if someone would vote in favor of high density. I just don't want to see the current project because I think it would be more appropriate to be further west. And I think we can accommodate both plans to satisfy the public and the goodwill behind what they want us to do. I don't think the public.
Mr. Mayor?
Plan.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, a point of order. We're not talking about a development. We're talking about, we've got on our agenda the comprehensive plan. I think we've gone a little far afield. We've got the comprehensive plan in front of us and we'll be voting on it in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Actually, I personally wanted to say that I've been on the council for a while, and it has been I have appreciated the process by which we've developed this vision for expanding in Man Valley, and it's nice to see it. It's nice to see it. It's nice to see a proposal for what it might look like. So,
Yeah. And I think Mr. Plunkett, 1 second. I think there's one thing we do have to remember that the first part of this we're talking about that didn't go to the planning commission was actually sent to all the planning commission members, and they all had an opportunity to give their thoughts and concerns on this project. And other than I think two members had two, or maybe I'd have to look again. There's either 2 or 3 members had some concerns, but they all seemed they all said they were fine with this project going forward. So it wasn't that they didn't have any input. They all had a chance to put as much input as they wanted to before it came to the council. So just so everybody understands that part of it. Mr. Plunkett, you had something you'd like to say?
As we're looking at the plan presented here, leaving aside the 7.09 acres that we're talking about, there are parts here that I am very, very much in favor of. I'm very impressed with the amount of open space and protected land easement that's put in here. And in 124 acres will be long-term something that has the potential for really making a much larger regional park system in that area. So that part I'm very impressed with. I really appreciate the mixed use commercial, medium, and high density residential, especially as it's close to our historic downtown, that there is a absolute need, if we want to maintain a functional downtown business district, to recognize that we have a capacity load and traffic issues with people getting from where they are to that business district, and that by putting that high density housing as close as we can, I don't know if that's pink or purple on the map shown here, to the downtown area, we're providing customers that are going to be within walking distance so that businesses won't be limited by downtown parking, but rather we'll see expanding opportunity as we have a greater customer base. The part that I do wonder about here, and this may have been discussed long before I was on the council. I apologize for being like a child walking into the middle of a movie here. But the commercial business park area that we're looking at there, we are still relatively close to our core city there. And as we look at what has happened historically in other areas, we end up seeing what is commonly termed as leapfrog development. And I don't know enough about the road capacity issues on radio, but being close to the city there, I wonder if there is not another area a little farther out that might be more appropriate for the business park area, and that this area close to the city would serve potentially our future interests for medium and low residential density residential in the area that's the great business park here. And again, I apologize that this issue may have been hashed out long before I've been here. But as I look at this plan, that is where my concern is that as we look out 30 and 50 and 80 years, we are part of a multi-state metropolitan area that is expanding, and those borders of expansion are rapidly approaching River Falls, and that will impact our residential development, just as the development in Portland, Oregon impacted Washington State to the north. And as we look at Portland, the 40-mile greenbelt that they built was not wide enough that there was leapfrog development outside that 40-mile greenbelt. And this is a half mile. With what I see coming as the numbers in that time period, I don't know that it would be in our long-term interest to have our business park in the midst of what could be a great regional park with the conservancy area there, and then the housing that I see coming on the other side. But again, I'm not on the planning commission. I don't know road capacity and some other issues that will impact this, and those may have been considered.
Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Does anybody else have any questions about the comprehensive plan, future land use map on this resolution?
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yep,
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
Mr. Watson.
I want to just give folks a couple of things to think about, and piggyback a little bit on what Mr. Plunkett just mentioned. And there is, in this particular change, first of all, this plan is we're making some changes to future land use, but within the context of the larger city comprehensive plan, which I have been speaking with city staff for about a year and a half now about getting that updated, so we don't have to do this in a piecemeal fashion like we're doing right now. And that update will, by necessity of design, require a significant amount of public input. So I think I just want all the rest of you to know that especially those that haven't been around quite as long, is that part of the reason why we get caught in this bind of people not knowing what's going on, or is that our comprehensive plan is 10 years or more old, and basically the economics have been changing on us in the last 10 years. We had a huge recession, and now a major pickup again. But secondly, the amount of conservancy land that's coming in through this change in the future land use map is really significant, as compared to basically all this conservancy land was R1 low density housing. And I think that, or a lot of it was, not every bit of it, but even the large area on top of the bluff was housing. And so I'm really supportive of there's a give and take. There's going to be a give and take in all of these plans. And I think when we look at what the give is here, one is high density along the edge of the southern edge of the DeSanctis Park. We're getting, without going into the plan, because that's not on the agenda, but one thing I think that we will see in terms of the overall park is we're going to see significant benefit, and I'll talk about this when this comes back up, financially to the amenities of the park as part of this overall change that we're considering. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think there's room for a larger park, for this park to truly become a major regional park by connecting the existing DeSanctis Park with some of this conservancy land to the north and to the west. So I think we're moving in the right direction here. I encourage city residents who are, concerned about this to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. This whole area is going to develop. No one that lives in this area is going to live on the edge of the city. And I know people like to live on the edge of the city, but it's not the edge of the city for more than a decade, no matter where you are, especially in the kind of housing market and so forth that we're in right now. So anyway, normally, I'm for as much conservancy as possible. I think we've done a good job in other parts of the city in big developments, kind of like this one. And I think that, this is a smart play for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything on this one?
Mr. Mayor, I have a comment.
Yep, go ahead.
We're discussing a future regional park, beloved future regional park. And I believe that we can accommodate high density in this area, but my concern is that we're not listening enough to our constituents about what type of particular high density. That's why I'm in favor of Girard Corporation's development there. But aside from that, I think it's important to remember that it was originally slated, and I remember Councilmember Morissette brought this up in a previous meeting. It was originally zoned to single family. And we know that PUDs can be put into any of these type of zones. However, it doesn't necessarily mean it meets the original conditions and what people wanted, or what the original conditions from the family that donated that money to the park with the expectation of it being developed. So we know there's an expectation of it being developed, but to what extent? We want to keep the good things we really enjoy as a community in this park. And that's why I believe high density is expected, yes, but we also want to be very cautious about what goes into there to keep it a quiet nature park, as I think we all do value. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Does anybody else have anything on this? Okay, I'll move on to the resolution granting a waiver to the city's extraterritorial subdivision review authority in the town of Troy for the the EW Home subdivision. And I'll take a motion on this.
Mr.
Wait,
Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure you got that quite right.
What'd I do?
Make sure that you're reading item number 5, Exhibit 4. The ordinance to amend the comprehensive plan.
No, that was just the first reading, though. We don't
First
vote
reading.
on it. This is just questions.
On.
Yep,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. Yes. So we're on number 6 now.
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
I move we approve the resolution granting a waiver to the city's extraterritorial subdivision review authority in the town of Troy for the EW Homes subdivision.
Second.
Mr. Mayor, I have some comments.
Yep. Go ahead. Mr. Morissette, you can start.
I think many of you know where I sit on this position, and I'm just going to make some comments. I'm going to make the same comments that I made when I addressed the Plan Commission earlier this or later last year. I want to remind you that you represent the citizens of River Falls, not those of the town of Troy. I think the question we have to ask ourselves, what advantage or benefit would be gained by approving this action? If the answer is goodwill with the town of Troy, that is not something that they seem to want to provide. We've even, not to wander far afield here, but we've even got a goodwill issue right now with our EMS agreement with them. That seems to be causing a problem. So I don't think there's any financial compensation for the staff's work that's being done here. Based on the town of Troy's actions, I don't see why we would do this. The fact of the matter is this does lie inside the boundary that is there today. We either have a boundary or we don't have a boundary. And we are kidding ourselves if we don't think that somebody's going to come along next time and ask us for the same type of waiver. This further demotivates the town of Troy from entering into any kind of boundary agreement discussion and does not give them any reason to come back for anything else. We've been told that that there's a potential for some legal action here. I think acting under the duress of legal action is a terrible way to govern. And I think that we should not consider that as we go forward. Ultimately, the town of Troy residents are the ones that are going to have to get to their elected officials and tell them that they want changes and they want an agreement with the city of River Falls to do this. So with granting this, obviously I'm opposed to this measure. I think it's the wrong move for the citizens of River Falls. Again, I think we've got a boundary in place, and we need to stick to that boundary. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
Mr.
Gagne.
Generally, I agree with Mr. Morissette's sentiment and the logic that he brings to the table. That's why we do any boundary agreement, is to protect future uses of land and growth of cities, and have great working relationships with their neighbors versus just annexing in property. One big thing that I see from this property as say a detractor is that we do have an agreement with them, and we've been trying to work with town of Troy on a boundary agreement. Aside from that, this property is considerably outside of the territory of the city. It's probably going to take us about 20 to 30 years to get out there. Reasonably thinking about utilities, infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. Back to the point of what Mr. Plunkett said in the last item is, do we really want leapfrog communities out there that we got to deal with down the road? You know, he mentioned the word leapfrog, and that's what I've heard other council members say and commissioners say before, is if we get all these little pocket communities and then we grow, infrastructure issue, having to bring them into the utilities down the road. Back to the other side of that, we've got to think about 30 to 40 years, 20 to 50 years, whatever it might be before we actually get there. It is on a highly wanted and needed highway that's going to be probably blown up here in the next 10 to 20 years, based on the use and the access to housing and commercial business. One thing that we got to look at too is it going to be that big of an issue in 20, 30, 40 years when all of these houses that are going into this development right on the edge of our extraterritorial zoning boundary, their septic and their wells are going to be failing and they're going to need to be replaced. So it might be a timely, and who knows, I'm being very hypothetical on timelines. It might be right in our best interest at that point to say, hey, why don't you tie into the city? We're going to bring you in at that point. You know, it's very hypothetical if we're even going to be there in 30 years. I'm like I mentioned last time this came around, I'm in favor of it. There's a lot of pros and cons there. But based on a developer that's coming before us today, I think we got to do right by them. And I totally agree with Mr. Morsett's sentiment of we're not doing this for a township. I think we're doing it more for a developer and doing right by people versus just say a local government. So I'll be voting yes.
Anybody else have something?
I have a question, council member. Mr.
Go ahead.
From your comments, would you say that a yes vote would give Troy undue say in the future with, and as well as other cities around the city of River Falls, undue say in some cases?
What I guess I'm saying is that we put that boundary in place for a very deliberate reason. The boundary was set specifically. We drove around in a van, to be honest with you, and laid that boundary out as we circled the towns outside. The boundary was put in place for a very specific reason. We're now allowing an exception, or being asked to allow an exception, and it's not so much the town of Troy, but the next person that comes along is going to ask for another exception because they're going to be in another little corner, and pretty soon they're going to just nibble away at that boundary. The boundary is there, as we discovered with the town of Kinnickinnick. The boundary was there for a reason. That's one of the motivations that bring people to the table to talk about boundary agreements. And if we're just going to give in, then they've got no motivation to come for the boundary agreement. And my question to this council is a little theoretical or rhetorical, but what happens the next time somebody comes in and asks to do the same thing? They're going to say, well, you let them do it. And now they're going to say, now we're going to have to say yes or no to that.
Ms. Odine, you wanted to say something?
A few quick things. This is on the very edge of our extraterritorial zone. And I understand that the boundaries were put there for a reason, and we shouldn't do things in terms of, nation. Law has changed since the boundary was put into place, and it's my understanding that how ETZs are, how they're enforced has changed. And I would like, while I'm in favor of this, I am also in favor of looking at our ETZs and making sure that it complies with the law and gives us the most rights possible. So I see this as one little piece of the ETZ, and I want to tighten up the rules so we are certain of being able to enforce our boundaries in the future.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything?
Mr. Mayor, I have a comment.
Yep, Mr. Downing.
I'm not entirely against going forward with this. but I'm concerned about the precedents it might be setting with future decisions. And I also would, I think it might discourage the ability to work with a territorial zone in the future. So I think Councilmember Morissette brings up a very good point. If we want people to work with us, we can't always be the hand that says, we're going to do this for you. No, they need to act in good faith too. So I'll be voting against this.
Mr. Mayor,
Yep, go ahead.
thank you. I appreciate everybody's point of view here. But as Ms. Odine just said, this is right at the perimeter of our zone today. The property is also north of the city or the town hall, the Troy Town Hall, and there are already houses all the way around it anyway. And I cannot see us ever getting or needing to get that piece of property tied into the city of River Falls. It doesn't make any sense. And again, I feel it's unfair, and I think Mr. Gagne said this, it's unfair to sort of punish the developer here over actions that the town board did that they had nothing to do with. So I think just as a matter of fairness, this is exactly why we have a variance process in place. And when somebody comes to us in the future, we can say no. This doesn't mean we have to say yes to them every time. This isn't a court. So I'm very much in favor of this. I think it's a good way to move forward and get past some of these old issues.
Anybody else? Mr. Plunkett, did you have something? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you raised your hand. Anybody else? Okay. So Christie, we have a first and a second on the resolution granting a waiver to the city's extraterritorial subdivision review authority in the town of Troy for the EW Homes subdivision.
Mr. Mayor,
Yep.
Mr. Plunkett was raising his hand, but I don't
Oh.
think you were able to see him.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Plunkett.
Just actually interested in hearing more from Hal on this. He has got a better grasp of these issues than I do, I think.
Thank you. I'd be happy to talk. I really agree with Ms. Odine on this. I think that, and I voted against this, to be honest, on the Plan Commission. But in thinking about the changes in the interpretation of the ETZ law over the past few years or number of years, and my concern, and weighing that against the fact that that this project is almost completely outside of the ETZ boundary, and really a small portion of it is crossing into the ETZ primarily for access. I think that it's reasonable to give the town of Troy what we're being asked to do here is to cede our decision-making process to the town of Troy and let them decide whether they want to actually have this development in their backyard or not. I fully intend and have argued or made the stated the case to city staff that we need to look at and tighten up our ETZ ordinance in as soon as possible. So I'm for this. Looking forward to kind of getting this behind us and moving forward. Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Does anybody else have anything on this?
Mr. Mayor, I think there's a representative, the developer, available if there were specific questions or things.
Okay.
Don't believe they're planning to speak unless you have questions, but just so that the council's aware.
Okay. Was there anything else? Yep, Mr. Plunkett.
Is there a representative from the town of Troy available to speak to?
Fat chance.
Yeah.
No, there's not a representative from the town of Troy yet.
That does seem to be the center of the problem, doesn't it?
So, okay. So if we have nothing else, then Christie, we have a first and a second on this resolution.
Alderperson Bierstead,
Aye.
Downing,
No.
Plunkett. I'm sorry, was that an aye? Nay. Odine. Gagne,
Aye.
Hudson, Morissette,
Oh,
4-3.
Okay. So the next thing on their agenda is a resolution to censure Councilmember Ben Plunkett. So before we get started, I have a couple words for introducing this. Before and after the last council meeting, members of the community expressed their outrage over Mr. Plunkett's interaction with some citizens. A particular note were multiple complaints about the language used with one resident and a comment some perceived as threatening of a liquor license. I asked the city attorney for an opinion on possible discipline of elected officials in office, including removal. I received those complaints and the attorney's advice. Then I requested the city attorney to draft a resolution for censure on my behalf to present to the council. So this resolution, if passed, would publicly censure Mr. Plunkett. This amounts to a public acknowledgement that the behavior of the council member does not reflect the expectations of the council has for its members. It is one of the limited actions a council can take in this situation. During the discussion portion, I would hope all the council members will state their position on this resolution and I'll let the other council members state theirs. The discussion should focus on the resolution at hand and the matters raised in the resolution. I understand the city council will have more time to discuss general conduct expectations and address some of the issues surrounding social media and other forms of communication with residents at an upcoming workshop, and that would be the place for more of the general discussion on this as we move forward. So I will entertain a motion on this.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we censure Councilmember Plunkett.
Second.
Okay, we have first and a second. I'll move on to comments. Who would like to go first?
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to go first. I've served on this council the longest of anybody that's on here. I've just tried to add up the number of council members I've served with. It's probably north of 20 to 25, given the years I've been on and the different things. During that time, there's been many difference of opinions that I've encountered with council members. And it's never been personal or threatening. It's never been contentious, and it's been respectful is the word I think I would use of another person's point of view. That's what the residents of the city of River Falls expect from us. They expect the council to be civil and polite, especially while we're dealing with different points of view. We've got so many different topics right now in society that we're dealing with. And it's so divisive. And I have to tell Mr. Plunkett, I did not find his comments anywhere near being able to heal that divisiveness. You know, I've had many people approach me about topics over the years on things that they say, why did you vote on this? Or how come this ended up like that? And I'm always disheartened when I hear that they haven't reached out to us beforehand. And that's usually my comment to them is, why didn't you reach out to me beforehand? You know how to get a hold of me and tell me what your point of view was so I could understand a different perspective. We need that resident feedback. It's critical to how we make decisions and how we come to as part of our process. And these comments, Mr. Plunkett, have hurt that interaction with the citizens, I believe. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Gagne. Within the week following the comments that were made, I had people personally calling my cell phone, not just from River Falls, but other communities. One particularly, I quote, "What is going on in River Falls?" And they sent me a link regarding a River Falls page with a bunch of these links that people were just blowing up on. I don't think acting in the manner that the Alderperson acted in was professional. It wasn't responsible, and I don't think anybody would want their kid, their wife, their husband, any of their family members talked to in the manner that I saw Alderperson Plunkett speak to another person, whether it's in person or via email. I think them words were downright vulgar, and I get the sentiment that he was trying to make. Um, but we got to watch how we act and how we speak to people in the community. Um, the biggest concern that I have is when people look at River Falls, what are they looking at? Are they looking at us because of how we're growing and the family environment that we have, or that we got to shield our kids' ears and eyes from reading and seeing this type of conduct? It really doesn't go to play for a family atmosphere. And it's not something that I would want my kid to read on social media or hear in general out in the community. I've had also numerous people come up to me and talk about how do we get this guy out of office. There's one petition going around that's got 487 signatures to remove or hold Alderperson Plunkett accountable. That's only what's on the signatures. I think if Alderperson Plunkett was in office for more than a year, I think he'd be removed from office. I think there's enough people in this community that have expressed removal. And that's sad. I don't want to see anybody on this council removed because they believe something differently or they have different ideas of what should be right or wrong. We can disagree.
Personal privilege, Mr. Mayor.
We can agree on many different
Point
things.
of personal privilege under Robert's Rules of Order. I am entitled to that.
Yep. I don't
Personal
feel
privilege, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for recognizing me.
and not being interrupted.
Mr. Gagne
Yeah.
accused me of being vulgar. I would ask him to point to what word I used that was vulgar. At no point in any of my communication have I sworn, cursed, or used profanity of any kind. At best, I am being accused of failing to find a more diplomatic phrasing of rancid tubs of ignorant contagion. So be it. But it is my deeply
I
held
don't find
belief
that
that
diplomatic.
is not vulgar. Does
Okay.
Mr. Gagne have any vulgarity that he can point to specifically in the complaint as he is talking about another councilman? According to Robert's Rules of Order, I'm entitled to that privilege.
Yep, I think your comment that you just made about Rance's tub of contagion, you were pointing to a specific person and a bunch of people in our community. That in itself, pointing towards other members of your community, is vulgar. If it was a general statement about an object or a subject, that's different. But you were pointing to people that live in this community that are taxpayers that live here. They go to church here. They go to school here. These are kids. These are adults. Their wives, their husbands. They're our grandparents. Just because we disagree doesn't give us a right to be vulgar with other people and call them names and degrade them. No more than these people shouldn't have done the same thing to you on your personal social media. I find that very wrong. But they're not on city council. They're not a representative of our community on city council. That's the difference.
Okay.
I'm done, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Moving forward, who's next?
Well, I'm just going to use one word: disappointed.
Okay.
Really disappointed.
Anybody else? Ms. Odine?
Thanks. I just want to say that expectations of good behavior from elected officials are actually there for a reason. It helps us get stuff done. If we can't be, we need to work with people who may not believe the same things we do, who may not see the things in the same way we do. But if we can at least deal with them civilly, we can hope to get some work done and be able to focus on things that are best for the most people, the most citizens of River Falls. When we purposely insult people, are rude and ignorant, rude called them rancid and ignorant, that's meant to be insulting. That is meant to be belittling and degrading. And that is just not appropriate when you've been elected by these same folks.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. Plunkett.
Mr. Mayor. What I find incredibly inappropriate is that today there's a newspaper article about residents and staff testing positive at the Comforts of Home nursing home. And that not only have residents and staff tested positive, but that 3 of those residents have now
Mr. Mayor, I
died.
want to
Yeah,
off topic, off the agenda.
this is a resolution censuring you, Mr. Plunkett. Do you have something to talk about that?
Indeed, I am, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
That the direct behavior that I was addressing is the behavior that has led to the death and spreading of contagion in our community. People may disagree with my words. I find that they were the right words to use, and I am incredibly disappointed that people threatened the city and other residents with acting in a way that causes the spread of filth and contagion and disease to other members, and that has led in the death of 3 people so far. How
Mr.
many more, Mr. Mayor?
anybody else that hasn't spoken yet?
Mr. Mayor, I just got a
Oh,
point.
hang on, Mr. Gagne. Let's let everybody else speak.
That's fine.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to speak.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Downey.
Councilmember Plunkett, you just said reasonably what you should have said the first time without calling any names. And I know you're capable of being direct with people without calling names. You know, at a local government level, we're capable of following ethics codes that federal and state representatives fail at miserably. We have representatives who are elected at national levels and at state levels that don't act appropriately. It's true, and they're bad role models. But ethics codes work like what you'd call good fences, and we know that good fences make good neighbors. So I believe that you just demonstrated is that you can have discussion with people without calling them names. And that ethics code applies to all of us. There is no exception, but that's why people trust their local governments more. So although I agree with generally with your point, it's true. We do have serious problems in our community. I have constituents who are suffering in Wellhaven, as well as the people you listed. There's so much more problems we have in our community with the virus, but we need to, if we can't negotiate, and I think this is what the mayor is asking us to understand here, we are setting a precedent for future problems. It starts with name calling, then it goes to swearing. Where does it stop? So I would say the problem here is name calling. You're right about what you said, Ben, but you can't name call. It's not appropriate. And I think the mayor is not trying to pick on you in this sense. I think he's trying to say, hey, council, guess what? We need to be civil up here, and we need to make sure that we set a good example of what real leadership for the community is, even when we agree or disagree. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Downing. Anybody else?
This is Mr. Watson.
Mr. Watson?
I would add to the comments that I agree with from most of the council members that the example that we set on the city council is an example that is followed by by our constituents in the community, and so it behooves all of us to communicate with each other in this public forum and in other public forums when we are dealing with the public in a manner that allows for everyone to be heard and everyone to be respected, shown ample respect. And I believe that with the specific statements that are part of this resolution, that respect is diminished, and that this and that people do not feel as though they can be heard in a respectful manner. And so I support this resolution.
Okay.
Mr.
So
Mayor, if I may,
I've heard from everybody. Yes, Mr. Plunkett?
we want to talk about the right of people to be heard. We had two council members that asked for a resolution, a mask ordinance to be placed upon the agenda. That was removed from the agenda at your urgent.
Mr. Plunkett, we're talking about the resolution to censure you right now.
I believe that we are, Mr. Mayor.
We'll keep comments to that. So
This
if
is
anybody has
directly
anything else
related
to say
the
about the
ability
censure,
of
now would
us
be the
to
time.
have the
Mr. Mayor.
ability to speak.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, do I have recognition?
If it's about the censure, yes, you do.
It is, Mr. Mayor. This is about the censure.
Go on.
I find that the removal of the ability of council members to speak to an issue and then to first come back and try and restrict their ability to speak to an issue that has killed members of our community due to wanton negligence and disrespect to other members of the community is not acceptable.
Well, Mr.
And for the
Plunkett,
mayor-
I think you're confusing this. We're not, people can give all their opinions all they want. You're free to give all your opinions. We take, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't like the way you express your opinion to citizens in our town, and we won't stand for that. So
Have the floor, Mr. Mayor, or did I not?
you can have it back now. Let's stay on what we're talking about.
Do I have the floor or do I not, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the litany of things that people said, what specific items am I to respond to here? Or is it to respond to all of this laundry list of people that do not want a mask ordinance, that want to be free to spread disease and contagion to others in our community? Frankly, Mr. Mayor, I am incensed.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor,
hang on.
I call the question. I call the question.
Question.
Oh, we'll vote
I
on
think
the
I need a
question.
second to call the
Second.
question.
I second.
Diane second it. Okay, Christie, we have a first and a second on the question.
Alderperson Bierstead,
Aye.
Downing,
Aye.
Gagne,
Aye.
Morissette,
Aye.
Odine,
Aye.
Plunkett, Watson.
Aye. Okay, back to the original resolution. Christie, we have first and second on that.
Ms. Odine,
Aye.
Downing,
Aye.
Morissette,
Aye.
Gagne,
Aye.
Watson,
Aye.
Bierstead,
Aye.
Plunkett. I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Stan, this is a matter directed at me. It would not be appropriate for me to vote on it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Christie. So now we'll move on to the administrator report. Mr. Simpson, if you have anything for us, or if anybody has any questions for Mr. Simpson.
Mayor and Council, you've received in your report, a written administrator's report. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have about that or other things that I can impact.
Does anybody have anything for Scott?
Hey, Scott,
Mr. Gagne?
what are the Hearts representative in the picture behind you that are on the windows of City Hall?
Those are hearts thinking of other people in the community that were put up by city staff. That's the window in the front of City Hall.
I love what staff does. They do a great job. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have one comment.
Yep.
I would just like to thank Jason Stroud. I really appreciate his situation reports. They're very helpful.
Yep. Anybody else have anything?
Thank you, council member.
I have a question for Mr. Simpson.
Yep.
Could
Go ahead,
you-
Mr. Downing.
Thank you. Could you know about the status regarding the splash pad and other items that could be used for the public currently?
Is your question, what stage are we in our COVID plan and our access to facilities?
I want you to update the public on what is available and what is not, if there's anything that's not, as far as recreational use.
There hasn't been any recent changes to the operation that I'm aware of. Currently, City Hall is open and available with the exception of Wednesday afternoons. The library is available through contactless curbside pickup. The splash pad is available essentially dawn to dusk with some recommendations about capacity. The bathrooms at the regional parks are open and available for use. Other park areas are kind of on a first come, first serve open use. And we do have some limited reservations of park pavilions and other things. And of course, if you go to rfcity.org/COVID-19, there is a list and a status update of all of our various facilities. Is there any that I missed that you would of specific interest, council member?
Could you talk a little bit about the library? I know we're getting an automatic feeder for book return. When will that come into implementation?
That's a good question. I don't know the official timeline. I haven't seen a project timeline for installation at this point, but I believe that's something that we expect to be completed over the next number of months. There was an initial purchase order that was approved to begin that project, and we can get you an update from the library. I believe they probably have that update in the minutes, which would be in the next packet, council packet, the minutes of the last library board meeting.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott.
Mr. Mayor, may I comment?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Odine is your council representative, and she, I'm sure, has a better update.
Yes. The contract with a manufacturer and installer of the book return units. If I recall that there's some infrastructure things that need to be in place first, but they should be starting to install it within the next 4 to 6 weeks, I think. It will be soon. It will be this fall. They've already tagged all the books. So. Mr. Simpson, I just, if I could, I would just like to extend my thanks to the city staff for all the work they've done for the partisan primary. I know they got a lot of absentee ballots out, including mine, and they even sent me a new return envelope when the one I got was stuck shut because it came in the rain. And I know that they've also been staffing the polling places. So I just want, if you could extend my thanks to them for all the hard work they do to keep our vote safe.
I certainly will do that and appreciate the sentiment. I also will pass along that they've been smiling the whole time, which is it's hard to know how they can maintain that smile, but they're dealing with all of us River Falls procrastinators. So it appeared that we were very quick to get our requests in for absentee ballots and very slow to actually get our absentee ballots. And I believe they mentioned that 1,000 of them or so came in the last 7 days or so. So people had their ballots for a long time and then they deposited them in many cases, like my household today. So yeah, they've been very resilient in the number of changes that they've had to implement. And I'm really proud of how professional they operate. And certainly we give quite a bit of access that other cities may not be able to have because of our Dropbox and other things that we're able to maintain with kind of an all hands on deck approach for election staffing. So we have a number of staff that are deputized and trained and available to help us. So very fortunate. Thank you for the comments.
Mr. Simpson, I'm glad you mentioned the Dropbox, and if you could just elaborate on that for folks who might not know about it.
Yeah, I'll elaborate a little bit. And of course, all the election experts are working right now. But as an elections generalist, I will tell you that City Clerk Amy White employs a number of staff who are actually deputy clerks and are trained in the election laws. And those are the staff that, maintain custody of all the ballots, including for our Dropbox. So we're able to offer, essentially use our Dropbox for ballots because the only people opening those drop boxes are election officials or trained folks in that. And that also means we can accept ballots across the counter and other ways that help kind of increase the ability for people to get that ballot back to us in any way they can and make sure that it gets counted when it's returned. So I know we've had a number. The internal Dropbox I know is not as popular. We do have Dropbox inside the doors of City Hall, and we also have the drive-up Dropbox. And so that's a great ability for us to get those ballots back. Make it as convenient as possible because you can't always return your ballot. You may not want to mail it, and I understand why there has been some concerns about the mail, although we have generally not experienced any of those concerns that other places have about the postal service. So if you want to make sure you get that back to us physically, we're trying to offer that ability to do so. Because I think we believe this mode of operation for elections is here to stay for quite some time. It had been, frankly, gaining in popularity, so to speak, from people out of convenience. And so we saw, not huge increases. That we can give you the numbers after this election. That'd be something to look at. But we've been seeing some modest increase in the use of mail-in absentee ballots, and certainly now people once they get used to doing something that they find convenient, then they tend to stick with it. So I'm not sure if and when we get to flip the switch back to whatever the normal is, I'm not sure everybody will just show up on election day between 7 and 8:30 a.m. and between 6 and 8 p.m. like we used to experience. I think it's possible that the mail-in absentee ballot is here to stay for a long time, even when we can more easily vote in person. So that's the answer. That was a long answer to your question, but
No, thank you very much. I just want to make sure everybody knows that those two drop boxes, if they don't feel comfortable mailing their ballot, that they can hand it over in person.
Yeah, and we certainly would. We are not trying as staff to encourage or discourage a specific
Absolutely
way to vote. So we're trying to give people the options and then secure those options in a way that they can feel confident that however they choose to get us their ballot, whether it's in person voting the day of elections or it's Dropbox or it's handing it to somebody at the City Hall counter with a name tag on, that ballot is getting counted.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add to that real quick. People can check the status of their vote on mywisconsinvote.gov.
Okay.
And the only caution to that is it's not necessarily a real-time update. So we just want voters to be cautious that if they go on there at 8:01 p.m. tonight and they don't see their vote as counted, that doesn't mean it isn't being counted. It just hasn't been updated in the state voter system. And I expect that will become a smoother operation as more, there's a little more synchronizing with some of that, but people should understand that that's not the expectation of service. I don't believe at this point is that it's kind of instantaneous. It's delayed in some cases a few days, or I think the last election it was delayed more than a few days before it was updated. So, but that's we handle calls from people calling and saying, how come this isn't on there, or whatever, and so they do their best to make sure we know which envelopes were received, and so.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Okay. Let's move on to the last thing on the agenda is review of resolution number 6501. This is a resolution relating to the COVID-19 public health emergency, recommending the use of face coverings in public in the city of River Falls. And then as the council has requested, they wanted to review this resolution at the upcoming meetings. So the information has been provided in the packet regarding COVID-19 in our area. And I believe Assistant City Administrator Jason is there if anybody has any questions for him. You there, Jason?
I am. You can hear me now. I would add real quick before anybody may have any questions. I would like to give two pertinent updates. I believe it was the last meeting. It was Councilmember Morfett had for hospital capacity capability information to be included moving forward. So to that point, I had a meeting with River Falls Area Hospital leadership this morning. They will provide me with weekly stoplight data as far as red, yellow, green, related to their ability to provide appropriate initial care and transfer any critical care to the Twin Cities. And Pierce County, our health director in Pierce County has now started to include on her dashboard hospital bed availability information from the Northwest Healthcare Emergency Readiness Coalition, which right now, well, as of a couple days ago, approximately 1/3 of the hospital beds in the region were showing available. So I will be sure to include that on weekly status updates for you moving forward. The other
Thank you,
point,
Jason.
yeah, no problem. The other point I think I would share, and I think it was alluded to earlier, as you probably are aware, we have, unfortunately, we do have a localized outbreak in a assisted living senior apartment community. A press release was issued by the health official in Pierce County today. I believe the most recent counts were 23 confirmed positive patients from that facility, 15 of which were residents, and I believe 8 of which were staff. And unfortunately, there were 3 associated fatalities. So I guess what I would want to share with you about that is we do maintain almost daily contact with our health officials. We're very fortunate to have a partnership with the ones that we do have in St. Croix and Pierce. They do keep us informed, and we are exchanging information and or exchanging resource kind of offerings of resource assistance if and when needed. And as of right now, I believe the last time I spoke with health official Snyder, she feels reasonably comfortable that outbreak was remaining contained, if that's the right word, to that facility, to that site there.
You're muted, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
If there are questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Gagne.
Just, I guess, an update from Jason on that monthly situation report on page 89. It says for official use only, not for public posting. I think you made a point of clarification to council in an email that was just an oversight and this is open for public, correct?
I did. I am going to take the mask off because I'm the only one in the room now, and I'm finding that it is actually hard to talk with the mask on. I did. Thank you for pointing that out to me. That was from an earlier version when we were including some notes that perhaps wouldn't or shouldn't be readily shared. So at this point, I will remove that for future copies.
Appreciate it. I just wanted to make that clear for folks that might come in and read that after the fact.
Oh.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Stroud.
Ms. O'Dean.
I know that my impression is that Pierce County in particular has been very good about contact tracing. Could you speak to that, please? Of the COVID cases in River Falls, has it been successful to try to trace where they came from to minimize the spread?
I would also, I guess before I answer that, if John Smits is hearing me, I do believe AZ is on the attendee list if you're able to pull her in. We kind of coordinated that with some text messages back and forth. But I believe I'm happy to share until she gets here on behalf of her office that she tells us they're still able to do all contact tracing within the initial 24 hours. Her dashboard
Excellent.
that is publicly available indicates that. And I guess since I did put her on the spot, but I also wanted to show you that your staff had your health official ready for you. We'll
Thank
defer
you.
to her.
Jason texted me and said, "Get on here." And I said, "All right."
Well, thank you,
So
Izzy.
yeah, sure thing. So contact tracing is still going quite well for Pierce County. We've been able to scale up capacity in several ways. We had some volunteers early on that were helping us, and we've now hired 2 additional full-time staff members to assist. We are still able to conduct disease interviews within 24 hours and then contact tracing within the following 24 hours. We're also bringing on a team from UWRF. 6 people will be assisting us with contact tracing and disease investigation for students. I do want to let it, specifically to your question about identifying sources, what is concerning to us, and this is reflected on the Pierce County dashboard, is early in the pandemic, we were very easily able to identify sources associated with either close contacts to a case, an outbreak, or travel. But now the number of community transmission or unknown source is growing rapidly. So people have no association with a known outbreak, no contact with a known case, and no travel history. So it is increasingly concerning that we are unable to identify cases because it means one of 2 things. Either there are asymptomatic cases out there that we're unable to identify and aren't getting tested, or that people are not telling us the truth about where they were over the past 14 days.
Okay, Mr. Plunkett?
Thank you, Mr.
Oop.
Mayor. Question is directed to AZ Snyder. Of the initial chain of infection that you have been able to identify, and I don't know out of how many of these cases, such as the outbreaks, we've been able to identify the initial chain of infection. How many of those have reported being involved in indoor dining and or drinking outside of their house and commercial establishments? Do we have that data?
I'm sorry, I don't have that data. And I think it would be difficult to pull that data using the state surveillance system. We do try to do a good job of publishing data around public exposures in public spaces, but we can't for sure say what the source of most of the infections are. We have a sneaking suspicion a lot of the times, but can't say for sure.
Further elaborate, what are those sneaking suspicions that you have observed?
Yeah, so I think the most common source of infections continue to be workplace outbreaks, close family contacts, and social contacts. We've noticed that those interactions that happen inside tend to be definitely the most risky. As I said, we are identifying an increasing proportion of infections that have no known source. In this particular outbreak, the likely source of introduction into the facility was an asymptomatic staff member.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Plunkett.
I'm sorry, Mr. Plunkett, finish up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then I've got a question. I don't know, this may be outside of the area of AZ Snyder's knowledge, but we are now 8 months into this pandemic. What is our logistics and supply chain looking like on personal protective equipment that is more effective than what we've managed to cobble together in people's sewing rooms and Korean and Chinese imports that have, when tested, failed any of the US tests for what the label says that they do. Where are we at on getting 3M or Honeywell N95 masks available to the general public 8 months into this pandemic?
So to your question, I thought maybe I could help answer it until you added on the caveat of to the general public at the end. So in terms of responders, we're doing okay. And I just will share with you that here locally, we feel that our responders have enough supplies on hand to go 4 to 6 weeks at a time. And that's kind of the window we use for our metrics. And should we find ourselves in a bind of unable to reorder during that window, the state does still have cash and stockpiles of supplies for responders, but you have to be within your 2-week expiration window. You have to be within a 2-week window of running out before they'll authorize those supplies to be distributed. Thankfully, we haven't had to even come close to worrying about that. Your question about the general public, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. Anybody else? I think Mr. Morissette.
Yep, if I could, just first of all, I'd like to thank the health director and the city staff for their constant communication back and forth. I think that's great, great teamwork and putting formalities aside. I do want to ask the health director if I made a comment at a previous meeting when we did the resolution about the fact that the mayor appointed you as the health director for the city, you and the St. Croix County health director to the city, and the council approved you. So there is a point, I think, where it would be good to have some communication from directly to the council from your office as that appointee, if you will. Not to say that we want every last little piece. I don't want to put a time frame up, but I think it would have been good to have some direction in written form directly to the council, especially when we were considering the mask resolution and so forth. Again, I'm not being critical whatsoever. Things are moving fast, and I'm not a fan of creating reports or having you report for the sake of reporting. But as things become a little bit more major, or something urgent comes up, I would appreciate a direct correspondence between the health director and the council, because you were appointed by the mayor and confirmed by us. So thank you.
Thank you, and I'm happy to do that at Jason's and Scott's direction, however they'd like me to.
And I would defer to staff for that type of communication. Absolutely. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything for AZ?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for AZ.
Yep, Mr. Downey.
AZ, I work in the healthcare industry as a care staff, and I can tell you that I got sick and I was quarantined for 14 days, and it took a full 14 days for my test to come back. Unfortunately, I came back negative. I fear for our industry because the uniqueness of getting a test back and the asymptomatic interaction could easily spread the contagion in this sense. I want to know your feelings on what's reasonable and when we actually need to say contact tracing is no longer working, so you will take action when you need to. I know in bigger cities, it's much more difficult because they have a lot more people who work in the care industry, as well as other places that would increase the spread of the community spread of a virus like this. So at what point do you believe contact tracing will become ineffective?
So I think that's a difficult question to answer, because in hundreds of years, we haven't come up to a situation where contact tracing for a respiratory-borne infection is not effective. I think we will always do contact tracing in some form. I think the situation with testing is a problem on the federal level and is absolutely unacceptable. It should not take someone a week or more to get test results. It should take 3 days. Unfortunately, this is an allocation of resources problem, and we as a country are utterly unprepared for testing in the fall. And I would urge the leaders on this call to please raise up your voices at the state and federal levels to advocate for more testing resources. It's vitally important, not just for healthcare workers, but for children trying to go to school and people trying to go to work. It's vitally important.
Mr. Mayor, I have another question for AZ. AZ, regarding tests, does the county have any ability to get rapid tests? Because I know that some areas are starting to develop those. Do you know at what point the county might apply for those?
So I think when you're talking about rapid tests, you're talking about antigen testing.
As
So
well.
are you talking about antigen testing?
Yes, that's one of them.
Yeah, so antigen testing is notoriously inaccurate for people who are symptomatic and test negative. They need PCR confirmation, and so it's a logistical and financial difficulty for rapid testing to actually work. I think it gives people a false sense of security. I think we as a country need to focus on scaling up RNA PCR testing. Rapid testing it seems attractive, but in actuality, when you look at the testing algorithms, it's not all that helpful at this point.
Logistically, the tests in our area are being sent to Chicago. Is it possible that they could be sending them somewhere closer, like the cities, that would help lessen the time too?
Mayo Clinic's doing.
I think we may have lost our connection with AZ.
Yep.
Hey, Jason.
Okay, there she is. I'm sorry.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, most of the clinics in this area do use the national reference labs in Chicago, things like LabCorp and Quest. It's hard to get out of contracts like that after you've been in them for years. Additionally, there's not a lot of testing capacity in the Twin Cities area that isn't already being utilized. And I want to emphasize it's not the shipping time that's kind of stopping us from being successful. It's the processing time with the machines and manpower at the labs.
I was told that they are doing 50,000 tests a day, which is part of why they were backed up. If we're having an increase in infection rate, we're going to be waiting even potentially longer if an antigen test won't work, correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Plunkett? Hang on, Mr. Plunkett was first. Oh, Mr. Gagne?
So is Mayo Clinic doing any of the local ELINA tests?
Yes, they are. The Mayo Lab in Rochester is processing some of those.
Gotcha. And my question on is what's the validity of these tests? I mean, in a percentage wise, I heard it was like 75% of those tests are actually positive for actual positive people. So another 25% might be just positive, but came back negative. Is that how that works?
It depends on the type of test, but RNA PCR tests are the gold standard and they are highly sensitive and specific. They will not pick up other coronaviruses. They do, if sampled correctly, above 95% of the time pick up the RNA in the COVID-19 virus. The sensitivity and specificity goes down dramatically with other types of testing.
So if somebody was retested, I mean, does that exponentially bring up their results, I suppose?
I'm not sure.
That's a tough one. That's, I see a lot of talk about that, about some of these tests. That's just my question and concern, I guess. If there's such a wide margin there. I mean.
Yeah. We really want to stick to as much as possible and devote our resources to the PCR testing. It is the gold standard for viral testing.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Plunkett?
Mayor, we do have some upcoming changes in our community as far as human behavior, and we're coming out of summer into the fall. We're going to have some schools restarting. We're going to have a lot of personal contact there. What are we going to do if this gets worse? And at what point are we going to take action?
Was that for AZ?
I could do that as a general. I suppose if I want to rephrase that for AZ specifically as a question, I would say, AZ, what are your concerns and or predictions based on what we have seen from patterns in other areas with school reopenings and what we know about student behavior in both our K through 12 and our university and CBT student groups? What do you expect to be happening, and what should we be prepared for as a community and as members of the council?
Thank you, Mr. Plunkett. You know, we're all entering into a situation that we've never experienced before. I will say that I believe that there's no better prepared campus than UWRF. They have done everything I've asked them to do and more. They have gone to the nitty gritty of planning. They have devoted resources appropriately as they are able. All of this will rest upon what students decide to do off campus. And UWRF is messaging to them as much as possible and educating them that the more irresponsible we each are, the faster we go online. And so they're doing everything they can to educate students about that. It's also incumbent on us as community members to hold ourselves accountable and making sure we're supporting students in making these good decisions. I don't know what will happen with K through 12 schools, but again, we have been working with the schools. We meet with them every week, and we have since April to prepare. So it's hard to say, but I do believe that all of the schools, 6 school districts in Pierce County, have plans to go remote if things don't work out.
Okay. Does
Mr.
anybody?
Mayor, one last question for AZ.
Yep. Mr. Gagne?
So I guess what is the goal going forward? Is it that, I mean, it's like the common cold. I think the stats are out that the average person gets the common cold 3 times a year. Are we trying to not have people get COVID at all? Or is this something where everybody's going to end up having it at some point? I mean, are we kind of flattening that curve longer? I mean, what's the long-term goal here as far as local government, state government, federal government? Are we trying to just make sure people don't get it? Or are we just trying to make sure that we're spreading it out? I mean, what's the goal?
I think that's the $1 million question, and something that public health is struggling with right now is what is reasonable for us to accomplish. I think a letter rip approach has been shown to be utterly ineffective. We saw that in Sweden. Trying to achieve herd immunity via infection wasn't going to work. The ultimate goal is herd immunity, and the only way we're likely to do that is a well-functioning vaccine implementation program. In the meantime, my goal is to keep community transmission down so that I can prevent it from getting into facilities like comforts of home.
Okay.
So at what point?
Oh.
Yeah, at what point do we come up against the same thing as far as like, hey, I go get my flu vaccine and then I get the flu, right? I mean, I know there's different strains. I mean, that's going to be such a hard thing to control, isn't it?
So
And I put you on the spot.
I know I'm not a virologist,
Yeah.
but I do know a little bit about vaccine development. My understanding is there likely aren't enough strains of COVID-19 causing virus out there to need different recombinations of vaccines every year for COVID-19, but I'm not an expert in this area.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate the hard work that you do and trying to keep us safe.
Yep.
Questions, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Mr. Plunkett.
If I may add to AZ's combination on the need for recombinant vaccine, that should be qualified with a yet. The more community transmission and the larger pool of spread that we have on this increases the likelihood of creating those multiple strains that then will be reinfecting people multiple times with potentially disastrous consequences.
Mr. Downing, did you have something?
I did. AJ, AZ, I've had, as a person in the healthcare industry, we are not treating this as a common cold. We are treating it as a classification as a pandemic. Would you agree that this is not the common cold and that it's scientifically 10 times more lethal than the common cold?
It certainly shouldn't be classified with respiratory illnesses like the cold or the common flu. It is a Category 1 disease, which means it's of significant public health importance. And based on, again, what we're seeing at facilities like Comforts of Home, extremely deadly for vulnerable populations, more so than influenza.
Thank you, AZ.
Okay, anybody else have anything for AZ? No? Well, thanks, AZ. I appreciate all your help. You've been great. Okay, does anybody, any other questions for Jason? Okay,
I think I'm gonna really owe AZ after this one.
yeah, I think you are. Okay, thanks, Jason. Okay. I think that's it.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Ah, you snooze, you lose. Okay, we have a first and a second. Christie.
Alderperson Gagne,
Yes.
Plunkett.
Aye.
Bierstead,
Aye, thanks for bailing me out, Hal.
Morse,
Me? Yes.
that was you. Downing,
Aye.
Bodine,
Aye.
Watson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, everybody. Another good job. Thanks, John, for everything. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, John.
Thanks,
everyone.
AZ,
Good night.
whoever else is on there. Thank you for everything.